Okay, I think we are now
All right,
live.
we are here. We are
Yes.
here, and here is actually a hotel room for me. But the picture in the background is a picture from Nalanda University from the probably from the uh, 6th or 7th or 8th century. We're not. I can't. Actually, all three of them are represented here.
Hmm.
It was one of the yeah. So that's what's in the background. Although
That's cool.
right now I'm not very close to Nalanda, although closer than you. So
That goes without saying.
um,
Yes.
yeah. So anyway, I guess we should officially start the audio portion of this podcast.
Yeah. Now audio portion folks will not see what's behind you. So
That's true.
unfortunate.
So I can
Yeah.
describe it.
Yeah. You can describe.
Anyway,
You want to
greetings,
start or
Doug.
you
Yeah,
want to start?
I'll
Yeah. All
start.
right. All right. Sounds good.
Greetings, Doug. It's good to see you. It's been a while.
Yeah. Great to see
And
you.
yeah, um, it's always interesting scheduling things when you're so far away. And
Yeah.
so right now it's what is it for you? 10,
It's about 10:15 in the morning.
right? And it's 8:47 in the evening here.
Hmm.
So
This is the problem about time zones and scheduling things, and
yeah,
especially if you're traveling,
and especially when
makes
the time
everything
zone is on the half hour.
is on the that's even
The time zone is on
exactly.
the half hour. When you're in Nepal, it's on the 45 minute.
Oh, that's
It's
nice.
like you cross the border in Nepal and suddenly you're 45 minutes earlier.
You lose 45 minutes.
Yeah. Anyway, we actually talked about time, I think.
Yeah, we did. We
One of
did.
our earlier podcasts. So I think the topic today primarily is around spiritual seeking,
Pilgrimage.
spiritual
Yeah.
seekers, of which the Buddha was certainly one. And a few days ago, we got back from this primarily Buddhist pilgrimage, although since we are in India, there's certainly Hindu and Islamic, Muslim shrines as well that we were visiting, and the Taj Mahal, which was both a monument to tribute to the Mogul's wife, but also it's surround. There's also a Muslim mosque right next to it. So yeah, but primarily we were on a Buddhist pilgrimage, and we didn't actually do it in chronological order. That is from the birth to his death.
Yeah.
Yeah, geographically it was a little. I mean, it is possible to do it, but it was a little. It doesn't really work. So, in a way, to some degree, it started in Varanasi when we arrived in Varanasi, which was not a place that. It was a place the Buddha looked for teachers at the time, but he hadn't become the Buddha at that point when he was first time he went to Varanasi. He was still Siddhartha, and then we did go from there to Sarnath, which is also close to where he hung out as an ascetic with the other 5 friends who became friends before he then left for Bodh Gaya, which is then where we went.
Neat.
We were there for quite a while. Padi was there for a big order convention. So we were in Bodh Gaya for 9 days, which is a long time to be in Bodh Gaya. But Bodh Gaya is where the Bodhi tree is, or an ancestor of the Bodhi tree. And then the Mahabodhi temple was built there quite a few centuries ago. And it's a real arrival point for Buddhists from all over the world. And as
very
I've
crowded, I'm sure.
blogged about, incredibly crowded.
Yeah.
And so many different traditions. Huge number of Tibetans were there from various Tibetan traditions. You're walking, you're ambulating around the shrine, and you're people are prostrating in front of you. So it's like, real kind of interesting traffic flow. And it's quite amazing as an experience. Not exactly a quiet place to meditate. But for that, there are also, because Bodh Gaya has become a kind of international capital of Buddhism, there are dozens of monasteries and temples from all over, every country, Sri Lanka, Thailand, Tibet, various Tibetan traditions, Japan, Korea, etc. I mean, and in many of these places, the same thing is true. Sarnath, it's the same thing. And so, what I found particularly interesting is this idea. The Buddha himself, of course, was a spiritual seeker. When he left, and I should say, the other places on the pilgrimage. So Sarnath was where he went to turn the wheel of the Dharma, the first talk he gave. And he was there for a while. And in all of these places, monasteries eventually arrived. And Lumbini was where he was born.
Yeah.
But
that's in
we
Nepal.
were also, that's in Nepal. And then, but near Lumbini is what's the name of the town near Lumbini? Kapilavastu, which is where Siddhartha grew up and left. Now there's debate. There are two Kapilavastus. There's one in Nepal and there's one in India. But where we went to the one in Nepal, and there's quite a archaeological site there, which sort of looks like it was a town and a palace. So that's all there. And he left. So he left there after he was born, because it was kind of not an accidental birth. It happened a little sooner than expected. He was born in Lumbini. This is what the story goes, right? And in Lumbini, there is a shrine where he theoretically was literally born. His mother was hanging from a tree. So there's a shrine there. And then Lumbini itself is organized in a way where there's a huge plot of land where many different monasteries are being built, and there's some really gorgeous ones that are arriving.
And there's also there's an Ashokan pillar there, right? As well.
Yes. Yeah. There's an Ashokan pillar there. There's an Ashokan pillar in Sarnath. And then a side trip, just to backtrack a bit, a side trip I took from Bodh Gaya was to the ancient site of Nalanda University, which was enormous. I mean, it's kind of mind-boggling to think how large this area was, and very well restored, part of it. So what you're seeing behind me is actually one of the monasteries, and the courtyard where they all trained.
Well, for those who can see, for those who are not on the podcast.
Yeah, for those who can see. Yeah, it's really quite amazing. It's really beautiful. And it was lovely to go to these places after being at the Mahabodhi Temple, because these places were maintained very differently. There were not nearly as many people there. It was actually very peaceful. Same thing with Sarnath, where there are also ruins of a monastery, archaeological digs, plus this enormous stupa in Sarnath. And so what I found interesting in Varanasi, because people are still seeking in very different ways, and Varanasi, of course, is a major Hindu site. People come to Varanasi to bathe in the Ganges, to die in Varanasi, to be cremated on the river, and have their ashes thrown in the river. That is, considered to be a sure path to awakening. And there are still people going there, with, as seekers. And, it's fascinating, crazy, but fascinating.
Yeah.
And one can also say that there are continual boats going up and down the river, which now are unfortunately motorized, so that adds to the noise that's already present. And you go by the cremation grounds. There's several cremation grounds on the river, and it's a little disconcerting to see, corpses being burned. And of course, while we were on this pilgrimage, the huge Hindu celebration was happening, with 144 million people or whatever it was, where there was an unfortunate stampede. That was a few hours away from Varanasi, but that's also a kind of major, the major Hindu event every 5 years, or 4 years. So much is going on, and I thought, it would be useful to just speak of the Buddha as a seeker in himself, and how do we relate to that?
But also, I mean, I guess I would be interested to know to what extent you feel being at the sites has changed your, your views of the Dharma at all, or it deepened them in some way, or I mean, it's in the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, the sutta about the end of the Buddha's life, where he talks about the importance, or at least the possibility, of doing pilgrimages, because it sort of gives you inspiration. It's sort of inspirational. That's what he says. That's the reason for it.
Yeah. And we by the way, that was the other place we went, is where the Buddha died. So we hit all the bases. We hit the five places that he said these are the places one should visit. Did it personally change my relationship to the Dharma? No, I can't say that. Was I moved by being there? Was my heart opened by being there? My heart was opened by seeing the number of people who were there, as much as anything. And, by putting things in a historical context, it's like, yeah. And it may be too soon to actually know. But what was interesting, because I've been teaching an 8-week class, a Dharma class, primarily around the Noble Eightfold Path. And I was taking the class with me, in a sense, Every week I was in a different location, including the location where, of course, the Four Noble Truths were first taught. That was the turning, because that was where the Dharma wheel was turned. And so there was something about that was very inspiring. So there was an inspiration there, particularly, I would say particularly being in Sarnath. That for me was, I think, the most moving place to be. Because there's something that still feels alive there.
Because of the people, or because of the site itself?
No, because of the site itself, I would say. And that's important, because you also realize, and it reminds you, and especially when you're in Bodh Gaya and you have so many different forms of practice. I sat for an hour and a half, I think, at the Turgar Monastery, one of the major Tibetan traditions, where the monks were like chanting whatever Tibetan sutta they were chanting, with bells, with drums, with trumpets, and big trumpets. That was astonishing. Just recognizing how many different flavors of Buddhism are there. There are, and they're all happening at once in Bodh Gaya. And that was kind of astonishing. So did I have some major experience sitting under the Bodhi tree? No.
Right.
It was wonderful to be there, but I wouldn't say I was, suddenly, something shifted.
Right. But as in other words, it seems like from what you're talking about, it's more of more of an experience with the greater Sangha, sort of like a touching into
Yeah,
all
the
of the different,
Mahasangha.
all the different aspects of how Buddhism is practiced nowadays that you get to see around you at the same time, basically.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And that's a sort of a
And so many,
contemporary, I mean, more like a contemporary feature than a feature of,
for
of
sure, for
the
sure.
ancient site, which would have been quite different, of course, back in the day.
Of course, it wouldn't have been there. The tree was
Yeah.
there, but nothing else. I
Yeah.
mean, these were all, of course, built well after the Buddha died.
Yeah.
I mean, some of the there are a few times which, I mean, so for instance, I mean, Nalanda obviously was built 5 or 6 centuries at least after the Buddha died, probably 7 centuries, and the Ashokan pillars, were much late, not a few centuries later. Where they're still. I listened to your podcast about Ashoka the other day, actually, and it was like, or your YouTube video.
Oh, right. Yeah.
I think you placed it around 100 BCE.
Yeah, I don't remember
The
what I
Ashoka
said,
was
but yeah.
but so it was a few hundred years, but and so when you see those, the pillars that we saw, one was definitely not in its original place, and the one at Sarnath, I think, was at Sarnath, but it may have been moved to where they've got it on display now. I can't remember. And that alone is like a pretty fascinating story. So to see those up close and personal was kind of cool. And there was one that was actually sort of lying down, and you could touch it, and you could see the different languages.
Yeah. I think that the pillars would have been probably 100 to 150 years after the Buddha's lifetime, is my recollection.
Yeah.
Because at least on the most recent scholarly interpretations of when the Buddha lived, he died somewhere around 100, 150 years before Ashoka's reign was fully going. So,
Right. Yeah.
that makes sense.
Yeah. So there is something. There's definitely something to being on pilgrimage, and there were actually quite a few. There was a lot of people from Upadi's, the Triratna order, who were on pilgrimage that we kept bumping into, and we spent some time with them. They were sort of going in different directions from us. There was a tricycle pilgrimage that was just starting as we were coming to the end of ours, and there was a Cambridge Insight pilgrimage that was happening sort of with ours. So that, it's like so much coming and going, and I'm glad we did it. It was exhausting. And then, we sort of, as we were coming back toward Jaipur, we stopped in Agra, which is where the Taj Mahal is, which is a whole different experience, which is, really a spectacular thing to see, as well as sorry, it's been a long day. Help me. After Fatehpur Sikri, right? Thank you. Fatehpur Sikri, which is another major Islamic site, or it was built by the grandfather of Akbar. It was built by Akbar, who was the grandfather of the man who built the Taj Mahal, the Mughal that built the Taj Mahal for his wife. But it is spectacularly beautiful, and it's also a major Sufi site.
Is that the mosque you were talking about, or?
Well, there is a mosque there as well, but there's also a major palace.
Oh, palace.
And and Akbar had 3 wives: one Hindu wife, one Muslim wife, and one Christian wife. And which is fascinating. And so in the palace, they each had their own smaller palace, and the Hindu wife is the one that bared him a child, a son. The others didn't, and so she got the biggest one. But then in the other, there's the palace, and then there's basically the town, which is built around a Sufi shrine, because it was the Sufi seer that predicted who would have his child.
Right.
Which of the wives would have his child. So when he finally had the child, he built this a burial ground for the Sufi seer. And there is a Muslim shrine, a Muslim mosque there as well, which is really beautiful. I mean, the whole place is beautiful.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And it's much later. It's much later, so the architecture is considerably different. I mean, Taj Mahal was built in the 15th century. Fatehpur Sikri was built a few century or two earlier. So it's it's just astonishing what they built.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I mean, I was going to say also that pilgrimage is important in so many different religious traditions. I mean, there's pilgrimage in Christianity, the Camino de Santiago. There's pilgrimages obviously in Islam, probably the most famous one. And I mean, I guess I don't know a huge amount about the history or the reasoning for having pilgrimages. But my supposition is that you're supposed to feel like you're putting yourself into the person's shoes in a certain sense and following their footsteps, and as a result, you can sort of see the world the way they did by being in the places they were in, and walking in their footsteps, as it were.
And it would be different. I mean, it's what's so interesting about it is that while I was rereading or re-listening to a wonderful book, which I'll put a link into, that was written back in the early 90s by Ajahn Sucitto, and one of the lay practitioners who supported the monks in England. And the two of them did a walking pilgrimage, starting in Lumbini, and then hitting various sites. This went on for almost a year. And it's a fantastic book. I mean, the audiobook is really wonderful to listen to. But they literally were walking almost all the way. Yeah. So, which would have been a different experience. And even 40 years ago, it would have been a different experience. Because now, of course, what's so interesting is not only are people there on pilgrimage, but then there's all the commercial nature that evolves around it, which is particularly overwhelming in Bodh Gaya. And it's a little disconcerting, and people wanting to sell you malas, they want to sell you flowers to take in with you, they want to sell you photographs, you name it. They're out there to and that's just the nature of the model. And there's no, at least in Bodh Gaya, there's very few restrictions around it. In some of the other sites, it's a little more contained. And that was sort of another part of being overwhelmed. And also because there were various, thankfully, while we were in Bodh Gaya, the Dalai Lama didn't appear. That was potentially on the schedule, but there were two other major teachers, Rinpoches, that did come, and that created a whole other, kind of traffic jam, as it were. It was great. It was great, but this is continually happening, and so, but it is like there's like it's not spiritual materialism, it's spiritual tourism, and everything, and it's not a bad thing, and it's kind of a major industry here in India, which they need. I mean, it really.
Yeah. It can sort of, I would say, it can sort of. it can sort of become spiritual materialism depending on how you hold it or how you approach it.
Right.
And also,
Yeah,
I think this
exactly.
stuff has always
Exactly.
gone on. I mean, my understanding is that at these sites, whether they're Buddhist or Christian or Muslim or whatever, there's
Of course.
always
Sure.
a
Oh, yeah.
surrounding of commerce that goes on, selling malas,
Absolutely.
selling
Absolutely.
little
Yeah.
shrines, whatever it happens to be, because that's just the nature of the beast. When you're getting a lot of people in one
Yeah.
area, they, first of all, they need a lot of stuff, and secondly, they want to take something home with them, from that
Yeah.
area.
Yeah. And what's interesting, the last stop we made, and this was part of Upadi's research, was in a little town called Sankisa. Sorry, I'm just having memory lapses
No
here.
worries.
Sankisa.
No worries.
Thank God Upadi's here to let me know. Otherwise, I'd have gone to a map. Sankisa. It's been discovered that there are actually ancestors of the Sakyan clan in Sankisa. The what? Descendants. Yeah, ancestors. Descendants of the Sakyan clan.
Maybe.
This is speculative, allegedly, right? And so as a result, there's actually quite a strong youth Buddhist movement there that started almost 40 years ago.
Oh, wow.
And again, so this little place, right now, I think there's one hotel there, which we stayed in. And this little place is becoming yet another pilgrimage site. And so their monastery is being built there as well. Oh, yeah, right. And this is where he came down after his parinirvana. He came down to this town, so we're told, so legend goes, to teach the Abhidhamma.
Ah, yeah, okay, right,
So,
right.
Okay, yeah. So there you have it.
Yeah.
That was our last stop. And it was fascinating. It was really interesting that it was there. And there is a model of an Ashokan pillar there, which is 80 feet tall, but it's not a real Ashokan pillar. Mm-hmm. But when it was dedicated, the Dalai Lama actually came to this little town to dedicate it.
Wow.
And, suddenly this town was flooded, with 10,000 people, at least, who come to see the Dalai Lama. And so, yeah, it is, there's something important about the process.
Yeah.
And, again, as I said, I need to kind of let it all kind of reverberate now and see what arises.
Yeah.
And the memories are there, and it's like, oh yeah, okay, now I can sort of envision that trip from Sarnath to Bodh Gaya, which is it's a fairly 2.5-hour train ride. And so it's not exactly next door.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm happy to have been here. I don't know that I'll ever go back to Bodh Gaya. I will certainly go back probably to some of the other places that we missed at some point. And in a way, I'm sorry I didn't do it early on in my own journey. And I think that it's whether you need to hit these 5 sites, special sites or not, to complete your journey, that's in the eye of the beholder.
Right.
But we've written. There's some blogs that I've posted on my website. Which are sort of reflections about the experience, which we can put the link in, and I'll put a link into Suchito's book, which is just fun to listen to.
Yeah.
I have to say, he's a wonderful writer, and so is the blanking out of the name of his lay supporter who took him on who was there for him. They're both really wonderful writers, and it's just, you can have the experience without actually going on being here.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I'm sorry we couldn't podcast from there, because you could have called up the various suttas related to the locations, I suspect.
Probably could, yeah, for
Because
sure.
we know that at the beginning of every sutta, it refers to where the talk was given. And so
Yeah,
when you're
yeah.
right outside the deer park in Sarnath, oh,
Hmm.
that's the deer park in Sarnath.
Yep.
When you're hearing the last teaching about when what was said when he died, you're right there.
Yeah.
There of course wasn't a teaching in Lumbini because he was just Siddhartha at that point.
Right.
Um,
But there's,
uh,
stuff that you would think about when you went there anyway. So
yeah, of course, yeah. So um, yeah, and then I can't. It's hard to imagine him wandering around um, Varanasi. Of course, it was a different place then, but just kind of meeting the various teachers. Because even now, when you're wandering along the river, people will come up and want to offer you something. That reminded me a lot, and I think I mentioned this in a blog post. The first time I went to Jerusalem, I've only been there twice, but the first time I went to the Wailing Wall, the Western Wall, which is under the dome, temple of the dome. There was something that happened. There is something very moving there as well. That you feel because it's still very active, just like the Mahabodhi temple.
Right.
And there are people trying to sell you things like prayers.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay. And then they want money for their school,
Yeah.
but that's the way it works. So anyway, I couldn't do a slideshow behind here. Sorry, that would have been too complicated. Yeah.
Well, it would have fallen on deaf ears with a lot of our audience, the audio audience anyway.
That's true. I don't know if that's the right phrase to use, but yes, they wouldn't have seen it. So,
yep.
yeah.
Were you able to get your cup of coffee every day the way that we expect you to?
Almost. Bodhgaya was a little challenging, but we did find a couple of places for coffee. Interestingly, the best coffee was in Lumbini. In fact,
nice.
One of the reasons we stayed where we stayed was because we were told they had a very good espresso machine, and they did. And so, this was, it was called the Ananda Inn. It's a lovely, lovely place. Anybody goes to Lumbini, you have to stay at the Ananda Inn.
And have their
people
coffee.
are just so nice and have their coffee. And, we appreciate coffee. And now that we're back in Jaipur, we brought our own coffee, but we know where the good coffee is. And Bodhgaya was a little tough, as I recall. But, we're in India, so you drink masala chai,
that's good
which is
too.
different.
Yeah.
So you can continue to support us by buying us coffee at diggingthedharma.com.
Diggingthedharma.com.
Yeah. So, and we will hopefully be back on schedule over the next couple of weeks. And then maybe a week. We're going sort of on vacation at the end of February before we come back. And then when we get back, I'm going on retreat for a month. So you'll have to be on your own, Doug.
I'll be away for a couple of weeks too. So we're going to be figuring out the
schedule. In March. That's right. Yeah, okay. Anyway, friends, I hope this was interesting. And if my voice sounds a little under the weather, it's just the end of the day here. And it's still suffering from a lot of the pollution. And it's just the way it's been. So great to be with you. And have a good week. And
you too.
We'll see you next week, I hope.
Yeah, hopefully we'll see. Yeah, we'll do this next week. We'll see. Fingers crossed, depending on how things go and where you are. All right.
Well, we'll be here. We'll still be in Jaipur. So if we can keep the connection good. I know we faded out. You faded out a couple of times. I don't know. We'll see how the audio
is.
So, yeah. Okay, friends.
Great to talk to you.
Keep digging the Dharma.
Yep.
Take care.